Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today on this bright, cheery, sunny morning. We appreciate your time. We know that you are busy, and we're gonna hop in for today's session, which is on the policies that agencies that receive CoC funding are required to have in place and other administrative requirements that go along with continuum of care grants. So this morning's session is really targeted more to managers and other senior level staff. We're not going to be talking about direct services to the people who are using our programs today. So if you are a case manager or housing coordinator, you are absolutely welcome to stay on. A lot of the content we cover today may not be super relevant for you, but we are going to go over the agenda in just a minute, so you can decide for yourself whether or not today's session is a good use of your time or not. So before we jump in, I'm Lauren Peretti with Housing Innovations, and I'm joined this morning by my colleague who's waving at you, Isaacs, also from Housing Innovations. And I think looks like most of the people are on the call are folks that we have known a long time. But for anyone that's new, Housing Innovations is the training and consulting firm that provides supports to the Connecticut balance of state continuum of care. And it's part of our job to try to make all of the very complicated federal rules associated with the CoC program easier for your teams to understand and follow. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So we love to see you. So if you can, please turn on your cameras, although we certainly understand if that's not going to work for you today. We also really encourage everybody to speak up, ask questions, make comments. We like these sessions to be as interactive as possible, and we want to be able to call you by your name. So if there's a little visual here on this slide that shows you how to change your name in Zoom. If you want to change your name to the name that you would like us to address you by, please do. Liz will get the slides into chat in a moment if she has not already. We are recording the session today, so if there's anyone on your team that's interested that wasn't able to make it, that will be up to the CT Boss website. Usually within the next couple days. And the session this morning is 2 hours long. So we are scheduled and promise you we will end on time at noon. If there are questions that we're not able to get to during the course of our time together this morning, Liz and I will stay on for a bit after 12 to answer questions. So we definitely encourage you, please don't wait until we prompt you to ask questions, unmute, put questions in chat at any time, and we will answer as many of them as we can as we go through the slides today. So Liz and I will also try to be mindful that some of you may be new and not be fully fluent in HUD acronym speak yet. So we will try not to use too many acronyms, or at least explain the acronyms that we are using. But if we say anything that you don't understand, please stop us, because if you don't understand it, it's likely that others are also in the similar boat. So, just in case anybody has trouble today with their audio at any time in Zoom, I think Liz will get this information in chat also. You can phone in at any time, and this is the information that you will need to do that. And you can at least hear us, and we can hear you over the phone if that option works better for you this morning than Zoom. So before we get started, it's nice for us. We've got about almost 50 people in the room, so too many people to go around and do introductions, but we love to see who's here, and it's good for you guys to see whom among your colleagues is here. So please take a minute in chat to introduce yourselves. You can say, hopefully you've already changed your name, so your name is already visible to everyone. But the agency that you work for, what job you do at that agency, and how long you've been involved in CoC programs. So I'll take just a quick pause and give everybody a minute to do that. So hi, Margaret, good to see you. We've got, as is usually the case, big range. We've got Susie here from Friendship Service Centers, who's been at this for 20 plus years. Bless you, Susie. Lots of folks that have been around for a long time that we know, as well as some newer folks. So welcome everyone this morning. I am going to, we've got a lot to cover this morning, so I'm going to move us on to our agenda while you guys continue introducing yourselves in chat. So we'll talk briefly about what are sort of the underlying regulations that form the framework for what's required in the CoC program. We will talk about, a little bit about what's going on with the federal government and share a tool for managing some of that. We'll be talking about making sure that our programs are providing equal access and are operated in a way that's equitable and welcomes everyone. We'll talk about reasonable accommodations. We'll talk a little bit both about reasonable accommodations as it pertains to co-housing people with their pets, as well as about some best practices for agencies to think about in terms of co-housing people with their pets. We will talk about the different notices that we give to participants about their rights. We will talk about the Buy America preference. This says new here. I think this was new the last time we did this training, so it may be new to some of you, but it's not brand new. We'll talk about additional policies that your agencies are required to have and some other administrative requirements. And then we will close out, as I said, to make sure that we've got all of your questions answered, hopefully. And if there's anything you ask that we don't know, as is always the case, we will look into it and we will get back to you. So before we jump in, we just wanted to acknowledge, it's an ongoing battle for our team to try to make sure that all of the links remain live in these slide decks. So we did go through and check them all, and they were all working. But particularly now, as the federal government has been removing a lot of resources from the HUD and other federal websites, it is likely that you will at some point encounter some broken links. And we always invite you, please let us know when that happens. We will fix them. And also, if there are documents that you need from that, used to live on the HUD website that are not there anymore, please let us know. We've got a lot of those materials archived and can provide those documents to your teams when they're needed. A lot of you are very familiar with this language, but we always try to be mindful that we may have some new folks. And so you will hear Liz and I throughout the course of the training this morning using the terms recipient and subrecipient, and we just want to make sure that everyone knows what those mean. So a recipient agency, right, is an agency that enters into a grant agreement with HUD and gets money directly from HUD. So in CT BOSS, that can be a nonprofit, right? Many of your agencies are direct recipient agencies, have a contract with HUD, draw down money from ELOCs. A lot of you are subrecipient agencies, meaning that your contract is not with HUD. It's with usually either the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, or DEMHS, or the Connecticut Department of Housing, or DOH. And so rather than getting money and drawing down directly from HUD, you are under contract with and get funded through either DEMHS or DOH. Some of you have a combination, right? You're a recipient on some of your grants, and on other grants, you're a sub-recipient. And when we're talking today, we'll talk about, where requirements apply to recipient agencies versus sub-recipient agencies. I think most, maybe all of what we talk about today is going to apply to both agencies. So just do a quick Zoom poll to find out a little bit more about who's with us today. So answer this poll to tell us what type of CoC projects you work in. And many of you may have more than one type. So please select as many of these as apply to you. And then also what role your agency plays in those projects. And again, you may have different roles in different projects, so select as many of those as apply to you as well. And we'll give you just a few minutes here to answer those questions. Howard likes to sing the Jeopardy song, so I could sing the Jeopardy song for you all to entertain you. Do 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 do.
I think PSH is the winner. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone's a winner in the room, of course. But
All right. Looks like people give you another 10 seconds here to answer the poll.
yeah, this is a softball, people, too. Like it gets harder. So you want to do the first poll at least. Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna, oh, thanks, Liz. So as Liz previewed for us all, PSH is, no,
Spoiler.
PSH, we've got about 80% of the folks here this morning are from a PSH project, which makes sense because that's definitely the bulk of what we fund in CT BOSS is PSH. And then our next highest category is rapid rehousing, which also makes sense because that's the next biggest cohort of programs we have. And then we've got a spattering of other kinds of programs. Looks like all of our programs are represented. I see one person is not sure. So if you're not sure, you may want to just loop back with someone on your team so that you can be clear, because what's required in your programs is going to depend upon what kind of program is being funded. So talk to your supervisor, get clear. If we can help on our team, let us know. And then pretty even split between grant recipients and subrecipients. And then we've got some folks that are doing more like housing coordination, rental assistance administration. A bunch, about 2/3 of you are service providers. And then we've got a couple of agencies that are fiduciary agencies. So I'll get myself organized here with my slides. So these are the requirements that really undergird all of the compliance requirements that we talk about in this training series. So we know that there are a ton of, requirements for these programs. They're very complicated from a compliance perspective. And so, as I said earlier, our job at HI, or part of our job at HI, is to help make it easier for your teams to understand and follow all of these requirements. So most of the requirements for your CoC projects can be found in these first three documents. The first two are HUD documents, so the CoC program interim rule, which are basically the regulations for the CoC program, and then part 200 of 2 CFR, which is basically cross-cuts all federal agencies, or I don't know about all federal agencies, but most federal agencies anyway, and those are the administrative and really the fiscal requirements. And then the third document here is the CT BOSS policies, which are the requirements that have been adopted locally through a vote by the CT BOSS steering committee. So that's a lot. And the HUD requirements are like pretty notoriously hard to follow. So what we have done is we have compiled all of this for all component types into what we call the CoC monitoring guide, which is the fourth bullet on this slide. And that basically is one place where you can see, because in addition to all these things, there are also a whole slew of federal notices and other kinds of federal guidance And all of that is compiled into the CoC monitoring guide. In addition, for our two biggest cohorts of programs, PSH and rapid rehousing, we have worked with our friends at DEMAS and DOH to create these operating guides, which are hopefully a more user-friendly way for you to be able to look up questions when you have them, and kind of one place where the most important requirements that you need to follow are really summarized in those documents. So if you are running a PSH or a rapid rehousing program and you are not familiar with these guides, please check them out. We hope that they are useful to you. If you ever have suggestions about how we can make materials, trainings, etc., more useful to you, please don't hesitate to let us know. We are really take seriously trying to make all of this as easy as possible for you guys. So that was maybe not a great segue into this topic, which is not making things easier for you guys, which is, there just has been so much going on at the federal level. And we know that all of the uncertainty makes your already very difficult jobs even harder. And so, our team is committed to continue to share with you all of the best information and guidance that we have about what is going on. Unfortunately, right now, there are just remain a lot of unanswered questions. And so we shared some of this in the recent grant management training. We wanted to share it again today because it really is so critical in these difficult times that you have as many tools as you can. But so this is a guide. It was created by our friends at Homebase, and it's meant for COCs and homeless service provider agencies, and it provides some really good guidance on things that are in your control, things that you can do to help your teams manage all of this uncertainty. So we're not going to go through it, just a couple of quick highlights so that you know, a little teaser so that you hopefully click on the document and open it up. But it really has some useful information about how best to share, to process new information, because there's so much new information that's coming at you every day these days. And then making sure that you are sharing out that information, some principles to help you make sure that you're sharing out that information, particularly to the clients that you serve, but I would say also for your staff in a way that is trauma informed. Some things that you can do to make sure your management of your CoC grants is as tight as it can be, and some budgetary strategies that you can use in these uncertain fiscal times. So the most important thing that we have been really encouraging people to do is to stay current in ELOCs. And ELOCs, for those that don't know, is HUD's web-based system that agencies have to use, recipient agencies have to use in order to draw down HUD funds. So with the cuts that we are seeing in the federal workforce, we know that there have been changes locally at the Connecticut field office. It is just more important than ever that you draw down your funds promptly and that you do not lose access to ELOCs. So we really encourage people. The federal requirement is that you draw down at least quarterly. But we really think that in these uncertain times, that is probably not often enough. If, hopefully this isn't going to happen again, but, there is some interruption in access to those funds. You want to make sure that you have drawn down everything that you can. So we are really recommending that you do that at least monthly. Also, super, super critical is that literally 91 days after your grant ends, those funds will be permanently unavailable, right? So if you don't draw down everything by that 90th day, that money is going to go away. And we've seen it happen where people have lost access to ELOCs. They hadn't drawn down their money yet. it can take so long, and this was even before all of the changes in the federal workforce, it could take so long to regain access to ELOCs that people literally lost access to all of their funds. So we do not want to see that happen to you. So please draw down promptly and make sure that you don't lose access to ELOCs. And the way to not lose access to ELOCs is to, number one, make sure that multiple people across your organization have access and that you are keeping that user information up to date when staff turn over, and that you log in at least every 90 days. So put a reminder in your calendar to log in at least every 90 days. Do that even if you don't have funds to draw down. So maybe you fully spent your grant already, you don't have any funds remaining, you still need to log in every 90 days or you're going to lose access to ELOCs. And so if you've got any issues, trying to figure out how to navigate in the ELOC system, there's a link here on this slide to a quick reference guide. I think always, but particularly during these times of such uncertainty, right, we want to focus on what we can control. And that really means making sure our house is in order in terms of how we are managing these grants. So, people may have seen in the president's budget proposal, and remember, it is still a proposal, it has not been passed by Congress, that there is a proposal on the table put forward by the administration to consolidate the CoC and the HAPA programs into the ESG, or Emergency Solutions Grant Program, which means that all housing assistance would be capped at 2 years. So no one would be able to get assistance for longer than 2 years. And there is also a proposed cut to those programs collectively at $532 million. So not great news, but remember, again, it's just a proposal and Congress has got to adopt a final budget. So, in any case, there's clearly an effort afoot to dismantle the CoC program as we know it. And so we want to make sure we are doing everything in our control, including talking to our members of Congress about why the program matters in their district. And we also want to make sure we are doing all of these things on this slide, right? So we want to make sure that we are, complying with the federal regulations and requirements, that we've got eligibility documentation for our participants in the file, that we fully spend our CoC funds, right? We know when we're leaving money on the table, that communicates to Congress that not all of the money is needed, and that is just not the case. So we really, now more than ever, we are always want to do this, but it's more important now than ever that we are fully spending those CoC funds. This fourth or third item here, I think, is difficult often for nonprofits to do, but whenever you can, you want to try to be building reserves so that you can fund some rainy days if needed. And then you want to really try to make sure that you've got a team at your agency who is collectively responsible for managing crisis, so that you're not reliant on just one or two individuals, that you've got a whole team of people who are all on the same page. And there's more information on all of this in that Managing Uncertainty guide that we just looked at. So, I want to take a minute after all of that just to cleanse our palates a bit from what can feel, I think, like a lot of negative things. And so create a waterfall of positivity. So type into the chat, but don't push send, right? Wait for me to give you the cue. Type into the chat something that makes you hopeful or something you are doing to take care of yourself during these difficult times. Type it in and wait until I tell everyone. And then we are going to be showered in positivity. All right, you ready? Did you get something in there? All right, go. Waterfall us. Nice. Deep breathing. Playing baseball with grandchildren, yoga, I like that one too. Taking a break from social media, so important. All of the good folks here. Aw, back at you guys, back at you. So we'll get through this together, everyone. Thank you for sharing all of that with us and with each other. All right. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure that our programs are treating people equitably and that we are giving equal access to everyone who needs it in our program. So, the first thing we want to talk about is this is not a new requirement. It's been a requirement as long as I can remember in the CoC program, and that's each recipient agency, right? We really want to make sure that we are elevating the voices of people with lived experience of homelessness and involving them in how the design of our programs and all of our policies at our agencies. And so to that end, HUD requires that each recipient and subrecipient agency has at least one person with lived experience of homelessness on your board of directors or an equivalent policy making entity. So an advisory committee. So back in the day, I remember when, they used to interpret this, an advisory, committee was, okay. That is no longer the case. So in recent years, the field office has communicated very clearly that an advisory committee is not adequate to meet this requirement, and that it has to really be someone on your board, or if it's not your board, it has to be an entity that is empowered to make policy without being overruled by your board. I think typically, really, this is just having someone on your board. There's not a requirement that says when that person had to have experienced homelessness, although in the recent CoC competitions, HUD has definitely placed an emphasis on involving people with recent experience of homelessness, within the past 7 years. And, we'll see the direction that HUD takes on this in, upcoming communications guidance, competitions, etc. But I think regardless of what changes might be afoot federally, we all, I think, here on, this training today care deeply about this and making sure that our programs really are informed by the lived expertise of the people that we serve. So I know sometimes agencies really struggle to recruit folks with that lived expertise. So just wanted to remind folks that we have fantastic group of leaders at our Consumer Leadership Improvement Project, or CLIP, and are among our community representatives who are people with lived experience who serve on our steering committee, and some of them may be interested in serving on your board. So if you are struggling to recruit someone, please reach out to Stephanie Lazarus at Reliance Health, who is one of our co-chairs and also is the fellow for our CLIP cohorts, as well as Liz can put you in touch with anyone among our community representatives that might be interested. Also wanted to make sure that you have this resource here. There's a great organization that works in Connecticut. They are called SEAT, and they recruit and train folks from BIPOC communities, low-income BIPOC communities in many areas in Connecticut, to serve on nonprofit boards. So they do not specifically focus on people with lived experience of homelessness, but we know that there's a big cross-section among, lower income BIPOC communities are unfortunately disproportionately impacted by homelessness. So that is another potential resource, and there's a link here to connect you with them. And then the last bullet here, you are also required under the HUD regulations to really make best efforts to involve people with lived experience of homelessness in other ways, right? Always, we want to make sure we are hiring folks with lived expertise, recruiting them as volunteers in our programs and, providing other ways of giving them a meaningful voice into how our programs are run. All right. Any questions? Been talking a lot. All right, I'm going to keep going, but don't forget, if you have questions, please interrupt or put them into the chat. So we also want to make sure that our programs feel safe for everyone and that everyone feels like they are included and respected and celebrated. And so, we know obviously that people will choose to stay on the streets if they don't feel safe in our programs, and that really creating a safe space is more than just the physical space, right? It's about how we treat people, how we talk, right? What is like sort of the milieu that we create in our programs. And so creating that safe space really has to be an intentional part of our programs that we're running, right? We want to make sure that our teams are always, of course, modeling respective behavior and appropriate language. We want to proactively make sure that people know that they are welcomed by doing things like hanging signage in our programs. That's actually a requirement in CT Boss that you hang signs in your programs that signals to people that everyone is welcome in your space and that you are a provider that cares about providing affirming resources to folks. So, for example, by making sure that you've got literature about resources that provide affirming services for LGBTQ folks, for example, that is visible. You want to make sure that people know that harassment and bullying and discrimination are not tolerated and that you will stop it if anyone on your team sees it, and that you will focus on the perpetrator and not on the victim, right? So we never want to make the person that is being discriminated against do anything differently. We always want to focus our interventions on the person that is doing the bullying, the harassing, or the discrimination. All right, so next topic, fair housing. So want to make sure that people know that, you may have seen recently some changes at the federal level around fair housing. So want to just qualify for folks what that means. So bottom line is that housing discrimination remains illegal, right? And it remains illegal federally, right? The Fair Housing Act is still in place. And it also, Connecticut has state laws. And between those two pieces of legislation, in Connecticut, it is illegal to discriminate in housing against anyone on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, religion, family status, disability, ancestry, marital status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, legal source of income, veteran status, or DV survivor status. So some of those things are locally protected. Many of them are federally protected. But the bottom line is that discrimination against any of these groups remains illegal. So you may have seen that HUD has withdrawn what's known as the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. However, it's important to also know that Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, it's a mouthful, requirement remains in the statute itself, right? So the Fair Housing Act still has an affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement that basically says that if you receive federal funds for housing, which all of your agencies do, you've got to operate your programs in a way that goes beyond just not discriminated and actually promotes fair housing opportunities for people. So the change is basically like there used to be a lot of kind of detailed things that you were supposed to be doing in order to affirmatively further fair housing. Many of them were actually kind of hard for your programs to do because you're not marketing your housing, right? You're all going through 211 in the CAN system. So those detailed requirements are basically have been withdrawn by HUD, but there is a new proposed rule that basically says that you are required to certify that you have taken steps that are rationally related to promoting fair housing. So that could be things like providing fair housing training to your staff, right? Notifying clients of their fair housing rights, which all of you are doing because it's part of what you're required to do in the CT BOSS participant Bill of Rights. That you are posting information at your sites related to fair housing, and that you are educating landlords about their fair housing obligations, particularly should you witness any illegal housing discrimination. So, next slide here, we've got a resource. So these are our friends from the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. They are amazing. I think many of you have attended their trainings in the past. They offer great resources and really good training that goes far beyond what we are able to cover here. So if you're not already connected with them and feel like your team could use a little more information on these topics, please reach out to them. So, all right, we're going to do a quick poll that Liz is going to get launched for us. Here we go. So don't forget your responses are anonymous here, but the question is, where is your agency with each of these practices? You've fully implemented the practice, you've begun to implement the practice, you've not begun yet, or you're not sure. And then it lists a series of questions. Agency has at least one person with lived experience of homelessness on your board. Also, I think I didn't say this earlier, but really, one is a lonely number, right? One is the minimum requirement. We definitely encourage you to have at least two people. The more the merrier. Engaging people with lived experience in meaningful opportunities to shape your programs and have visible materials that communicate all are welcome here. So, and if you're not sure, right, if you're not sure that your agency is in compliance on these things, definitely encourage you to go back and have the conversations that you need to have in order to make sure that you have dotted that I. And more importantly, done this important work. All right, we've got about, I think, 2/3 of our folks answering, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So, on question number 1 about whether or not you've got someone with lived experience of homelessness on your board, we've got about half the people say yes, they have fully implemented this. We've got about 13% that are working on it, but maybe not quite there yet. 20% who have not yet done this, and then about 20% who are not sure. So many of you may not have a ton of interaction with your board, so you may not know that. But again, you want to communicate up the chain to make sure that the people who are working with your boards know that this is a requirement because you get CoC funding. So, and then the second question, engaging people with lived experience in things like, advisory groups, focus groups, through employment, right? This is awesome. About 2/3 of you have fully done this. About a third of you, or a little bit less than a third of you, are working on it, and a couple of you are not sure. But not a single agency answered not yet begun, because you guys in Connecticut are rock stars. So, and then have visible materials to make sure that everyone knows that they are welcome and that our programs are affirming. Um, this is wonderful. 80% of you are sure that this is done at your programs. 10% of you say that you are working on it, and just a few folks are not quite sure. So, all right. So a little bit more here on non-discrimination. So regardless of whether you are a recipient or a subrecipient agency, your agency should have written policies and procedures that indicate that you fully comply with federal non-discrimination laws, and that includes fair housing, equal opportunity in housing and employment, and reasonable accommodations, which we're going to talk more about reasonable accommodations in a minute. And also that you do not discriminate against people based on their religion. So this is actually a fairly common monitoring finding, that when we monitor, agencies have non-discrimination policies that cover their employment practices, but they don't have non-discrimination policies that cover their service provision and their housing, right? So the policies don't necessarily say that you don't discriminate against applicants, and that you don't discriminate against participants that you serve, and that you abide by fair housing and reasonable accommodation provisions, for example. So you want to make sure that your policies address both your employment practices and your services and your housing, right? And that those policies include fair housing, reasonable accommodations. And we often also see policies missing the language here about not discriminating on the basis of religion, a religious belief. And I won't read the rest of this language, but it's here on this slide, is what you want to make sure is included, or something similar in your policies. All right, so another area where you may have seen some recent changes at the federal level. So HUD actually has two different equal access rules. One was established in 2012 and one was established in 2016. And they really define, who you need to provide access to your programs, and in some cases how that access is provided. So because of local CT Connecticut state requirements, as well as CT BOSS requirements, despite the federal changes, right, you should continue to do all of the things that are described on this slide. Most of them remain things that HUD will also enforce. They did recently announce that they will stop enforcing the 2016 rule, which basically says that people should be served in programs that are gender specific based upon their gender identity. So, for example, if you are running a women's shelter, and someone identifies as a woman, you should continue to serve them in that women's shelter. Now, even though HUD is no longer going to be enforcing that, that does remain the expectation in the state of Connecticut. So the other things that these rules say is basically, all programs should be open to people regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status, right? You shouldn't be discriminating based on those things. This is lovely, and this has not changed yet. The HUD definition of family is basically that a family is whomever your client says their family is, right? So any group of people that present together and say that they are a family should be considered a family and served together as such, and that we do not separate families based upon age or gender of household members, right? So we don't say to people, you're a man, you have to go to the men's shelter, and the women and children are going to be served in this other shelter. Um, and also, if you serve any families with children, you have to serve all families with children, right? So you can't say we only serve mom and their kids. We aren't going to serve a single dad. We're not going to serve a multi-generational family, right? A grandmom and her grandkids or granddad and his grandkids. People who just identify as family, even though they've got no biological or romantic tie, right? Basically, anybody I say is my family, and you should serve them together as a family. So you can't require marriage, right? You can't only serve children under a certain age. When possible, cans, I think, are referring families to projects that are specifically designated to meet those families' needs. That might not always be possible. There might not be enough family units when a family needs services. And so scattered site project, if you've got a congregate project, who you can serve is going to be limited by your unit size. But if you've got a scattered site project, and the CAN has referred someone to you and they are eligible for your project, you should serve them regardless of their family configuration. Again, hopefully, for the most part, families with kids are getting referred to projects that are specifically set up to meet the needs of those kids. And then just a quick reminder that even if you said in your project application, right, that you are a project that serves only singles or you are a project that serves only families, and I'll go to the next slide on this, right? HUD understands, and CT BOSS actually requires that you accommodate changes to people's family composition, right? So life happens, people get pregnant, people get girlfriends, and that those relationships are important to people, and we should accommodate those changes. So regardless of whether or not you said you're serving all singles or you're serving all families, as people's family composition changes, you should continue to serve them. There are a few exceptions to that, right? If the unit is not large enough, right? So HUD says that you've got to have 2 bedrooms or rooms where people can sleep. Excuse me, I got that backwards. HUD says you have to have 1 bedroom or 1 room where people can sleep for every 2 people. So as long as the unit is big enough by that standard, you should accommodate these changes. There also may be, very unique circumstances, all this should be the exception, not the rule, where the change, like you just simply can't accommodate someone. It presents an imminent health and safety risk for, staff, other people at the program, the family itself, in order to accommodate someone. Like you could think of an instance where, someone is extremely psychotic and just unsafe, not able to be needs a much higher level of service at that moment. That might be an instance where you wouldn't accommodate such a change. So I see Kim put a comment in the chat box. So grateful for CT Boss's stance on all of these issues. Respect for the diverse populations we serve is so important. Thank you, Kim. Respect back at you. We appreciate all that you guys are doing to try to make sure that we continue to serve everyone in a way that meets their needs. So, all right, I think I covered this. So now we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. So we're going to talk about pets and about how important they are to many of our clients. And I threw this picture in here. This is Gracie. This is one of my pups. She and her 2 sisters are absolutely part of my family. And I think many of you probably also have pets who are part of your family. And we know that many of our clients feel the same way about their pets. So as this quote says, "My pet is part of my family. If you do not understand that, then you do not know me." And that is definitely the case for me personally. So we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements and best practices related to reasonable accommodations, but also beyond reasonable accommodations, co-housing people with their pets. But before we do that, I want to give you all a chance to share a little bit about the pets that you love. So if you are a pet lover, please share in the chat the name of a pet that you adore, whether it's your pet or someone else's pet. And Liz was first on the board with Finn, who we know is near and dear.
I don't get out much, so
Picasso, oh, sassy. A German Shepherd named Jill. I might be saying it wrong, Kim. I'm sorry. Bubbles. I love that. I have a good friend who has a pit bull named Bubbles. Binks and Mayhem. All right. We've got a pet loving crowd here, which I adore. So, and if you don't love pets, it's okay. We love you too. Um, all right. So first we're going to talk about reasonable accommodations. So a reasonable accommodation is kind of the nutshell, in a nutshell. It's a request by someone who has a disability for you to do something that's outside of your usual practice because they have a disability and they need you to do that thing because of their disability in order to enable them to succeed in their program. So an example would be, somebody has an anxiety disorder and they need an assistance animal to live with them in your congregate PSH program, even though you don't permit pets, because that assistance animal helps them to manage their anxiety symptoms. So that's just one example, right? There are other examples here on this slide. And there are many things that people could ask for as reasonable accommodations that have nothing to do with pets. So another example that's here is that normally in the CoC program, you are not permitted to rent a unit from a family member, but it might be necessary for somebody with a disability because that family member is providing them with care that helps them to manage their disability. And so that's another example of a possible reasonable accommodation. There isn't like really a list of, like it could be anything that somebody could ask for, and you really need to evaluate each situation. It's not like there's an approved list of reasonable accommodations, right? Every situation has to be evaluated on its own merits. So a few things to keep in mind. The requests do not need to be made in writing, so you can, you can and you should accept verbal requests for reasonable accommodations. And you don't necessarily need to ask for documentation of someone's disability. You may not ask for documentation of a visible disability, but if you are going to request documentation of the disability, that documentation, it follows the same rules as our rules for disability documentation for permanent supportive housing. So it doesn't have to be a doctor. It can basically be any professional who's licensed to diagnose and treat the disability that the person has. So that can be a licensed clinical social worker, for example. And then just to remember that you really want to try to accommodate the requests as much as possible. However, you are not required to make an accommodation in certain circumstances. And those are if it would present an undue financial or administrative burden or cause a fundamental alteration in your program. That's the language of the requirement. And so an example is somebody, says, I have a profound disability, and in order for me to continue to stay in your program, I need a full-time nurse, right? And I want you to pay for that full-time nurse, right? That's obviously not something that's in your budget. That would be, something that you could deny because it's a financial hardship. Like you're just not able to do that. Another example from this slide, right? We say that, somebody might request a higher utility allowance, for example, because they are on psychotropic medications that make them more vulnerable to the heat and they have to run their air conditioning a lot more than other folks may need to. If you are fully spent on your grant and you do not have money available in your budget in order to approve that would be another example. I mean, obviously, if you can tap some other source, please do. but you don't have to approve requests when it would be a financial hardship. So talking a little bit about how this relates specifically to animals. So I'm not going to go through all of this. And on the right-hand side of this slide at the top, the green underlined hyperlink there, that will take you to this tool. And it's basically like a decision tree that you can use to determine whether an animal is a service animal, an assistance animal, or a pet. So, you're required, right, to allow service animals in your housing programs. It's not even a reasonable accommodation, right? You just have to do it. If someone has a service animal, like a seeing eye dog, right, they have access to your program, no questions asked. If you have somebody who has a disability, right, you're also required to make a reasonable accommodation for someone that needs an assistance animal. And remember, an assistance animal is not necessarily trained in the same way that a service animal is. So you are required to make a reasonable accommodation for assistance animals if that animal alleviates a symptom or effect of their disability. And then finally, though you are not required to permit pets in your housing programs, doing so, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is really increasingly recognized as a best practice in the homelessness response system, and is really also increasingly being recognized as a critical component of trauma-informed care. So on the bottom of this slide, there is the HUD rule that outlines all of the different requirements related to this. And then there's also an interactive web-based tool that you can use to evaluate when you get requests for assistance animals in your housing. This tool can lead you through a series of questions that can help you to determine which you should approve and which you may not necessarily need to approve, although we definitely would love to see as many people as possible be able to stay together with their animals. So the reason for that is that we know, right, that 66% of people in the US, or not people in the US, but households in the US have pets, right? So that's a very high number. And it's a reality, frankly, that the human service system largely ignores. So in the human service system, sadly, people's relationships with their pets are either invisible, or we treat pets as a barrier, right? Not as a member of the family. So again, as I said, increasingly there is recognition in our sector that to be truly trauma-informed, we really need to be co-sheltering and co-housing people with their pets, that the system will not be trauma-informed until that becomes the norm. So we did a training just on this topic recently for street outreach teams, and it's on the outreach page of our website. So if you want to dive deeper into this topic, we invite you to go check that out. But there's really this growing body of scientific evidence that demonstrates that pets are beneficial, right? There's a reason why 66% of us own a pet, right? We know from science that there are benefits to people's physical health, their mental health, their social health, and that interacting with pets, whether it's my pet or Finn at Liz's house, right? Interacting with pets increases good chemicals in our bodies and in our brains, right? So it increases people's dopamine, their endorphins, their oxytocin, and it reduces people's stress and their cortisol level. And those have tremendous physical and mental health benefits. So we also know that having a pet improves people's heart health. It can improve depression. It can even improve blood pressure, right? It's really kind of this emerging area of scientific evidence that is quite astonishing and really supports us doing everything we can to keep people and their pets together. We also know, right, that people's bonds with their pets is very, very deep. So pets are family for many of us. And we'll put our own safety and even our lives at risk to ensure the safety of our pets. And I know you see this in your programs when you're working with people on the streets sometimes because they can't find a place with their pets. We see it in disasters where people won't evacuate without their pets. And we also know that when people are separated from their pets, it's traumatic, right? It's traumatic and it can build, it can trigger bereavement and even increase people's risk of self-harm. So again, if your intent is to be a trauma-informed program, agency, and you are not co-housing or co-sheltering, it's something that you probably want to look at. And good news, there is help, right? So, there are projects all around the country that are doing this, that are doing it successfully. And there, many of the fears that I think that prevent agencies from doing co-housing and co-sheltering don't actually play out once programs start doing it. So we know from work that this organization who's linked here, My Dog is My Home, has done, that bites are very, very, very rare. That there are many programs that are doing this and bites are extremely rare. And that even though, I said 66% of US households have pets, not that many folks who are experiencing homelessness have been able to retain that relationship with their pets. So a far smaller percentage of your participants will bring pets with them to your program. So, there are often concerns that a shelter, for example, is going to be inundated with pets. It just doesn't play out when agencies start doing this. So in one review that My Dog is My Home did, it's only about 5 to 10% of clients that brought their animals to the shelters. And that once agencies started to do this, the benefits really were very widely acknowledged, even among people on their team who were the most resistant to the idea of doing it, right? So what programs see is that being responsible for the care of an animal really provides a critical role and structure in a client's daily routine and actually helps them not only to take care of themselves, not only to take care of the pet, but also to take care of themselves. It provides a sense of motivation and responsibility that's helpful in many ways to the person. And also, pets, I think for many of us really just introduce joy into, what can be a really challenging environment in some of these programs. So having pets amongst us is therapeutic, not just for the pet owners, but also for other people in the program and for teams. And it's really doable no matter what the design of your facility is. There are many programs that have, congregate shelter, all one big open dorm kind of situation. And they're doing it and they're making it work. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? There's help available from My Dog is My Home and other organizations who have already started doing this. And we're happy to connect you with those folks. And there are resources here on this slide, including Pet Help Finder, which is a search engine that you can use to identify resources for veterinary service, food pantry supplies, boarding services, et cetera, in your local communities. Do we have questions in the chat room?
Yes, so we have a question. Do landlords have to accept an emotional support animal by law? Is this covered under ADA?
Yeah, so if they're taking CoC rental assistance money, then yeah, they should be making reasonable accommodations also in their programs because they are accepting federal money in their programs.
And just comment supporting the importance of having pets and that Go Margaret, Safe Futures, they've been accepting folks in their program since 2017. And then she also notes that studies have shown that folks won't leave sometimes where they're living because they can't take their pet. So
Go Safe Futures.
good stuff, Margaret. Thank you.
All right. So, and then these are just a couple more resources. And again, we are happy to provide additional resources and connect you all with folks that are doing this. But there's some example pet policies, a lease addendum, a needs assessment, and an acknowledgement of pet owners of what their responsibilities are if they are going to bring their pets into one of your programs. So, all right, we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to go quickly through this next set of stuff. So, some other federal requirements related to working with folks with disabilities, right? We obviously have to make sure that our physical space is accessible for people with disabilities. So, that is, entrance ramps so that steps are not a barrier to access, accessible bathrooms, things like that. We also are required to make sure that we are communicating with people in ways that work for them, regardless of what their disabilities are. So that can be American Sign Language interpretation. It can be making sure that written materials are available in Braille, and it includes making sure that your website and all of the electronic documents that you are using are accessible to people with visual impairments. So people with visual impairments will often use what's called a screen reader that basically reads a website or a document out loud to them. And in order for that screen reader to work, there are certain things that you need to do in those electronic documents. So there's a widget built right into the Microsoft Office suite. So, for example, if you go into Microsoft Office in the review section of Word, there's this feature called Check Accessibility. If you click on that, it will tell you what the issues are. So it's things like certain fonts are not good or certain color contrasts, right? You want to make sure that you use the built-in heading features and subheading features rather than doing that stuff manually. We did an entire training on this. It's linked here. Shannon on our team worked with the consultant that we use on this for CT Boss to create the last document here, which is simple steps to creating accessible materials. So you want to make sure that your teams are, if you don't have somebody on your team that's set aside to make sure that all of your documents do this, then you want to educate each person on your team about how to do this. And it's fairly straightforward. You don't need a lot of technical expertise to do this. There's simple things that you can do to make sure documents are accessible to people. Okay, we're going to do a quick poll and then I'm going to turn it over to Liz. All right, so the questions here are, can an agency have a client advisory committee instead of a person with lived experience of homelessness on their board? And are both recipient and subrecipient agencies required to ensure accessibility of electronic documents? And is it always illegal to deny a request for a reasonable accommodation? And while you're doing that, I'm going to read what Rob put here in the chat. It's been helpful to educate in-home providers that they do not have to tolerate a tenant's pet to jump on them, worse to charge at them. It is okay to have a pet placed in a safe area prior to in-home services. There are ways for everyone to be safe and feel cared. Thank you, Rob. That's actually one of the big things that the agencies that have done this talk about is containment strategies, right? To make sure that that where you've got staff maybe that aren't comfortable with pets, or certainly if there is an aggressive pet, that pet is contained either in a crate, leashed, or in a separate room when your staff visit. So thanks for that. So I'll give people, I've got about 50% of people responding. Give a couple more minutes, or just not a couple more minutes, one more minute. All right. We're running a little bit behind, so I am going to end the poll and share the results. So, first question, can an agency have a client advisory committee instead of a person with lived experience on their actual board? And the answer to that, 91% of you got it correct, is no, right? So by all means, have a client advisory board. There's nothing that prohibits you from having a client advisory board. That's a great thing to do. It just, you also have to have someone on your board. It doesn't, having a client advisory committee does not fulfill that requirement. And then the second question, are both recipient and subrecipient agencies required to ensure accessibility of electronic documents? The answer to that is yes, you all got it right. And is it always illegal to deny a request for a reasonable accommodation? So I guess the trick here, and this is maybe we need to reword this question. So we meant to say no, but if it's reasonable, then you have to approve it, right? So the criteria are if it's an undue financial burden, or an administrative burden, or it causes you would sort of require you to substantially alter the kind of program that you are running, then you would not need to accommodate it. So you have to accommodate things as long as they are in fact reasonable based upon those standards. So, okay, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Great. Good. Yep. So we are going to talk about participant rights and notices. I'm going to ask Lauren, and I'll even put Sarah on the spot if I start making things up, if I don't give enough detail, please don't let me lie to the masses. So anyway, all right, we're going to try to keep this fun and going. So the first thing we're going to talk about are educational rights. Fix my screen. So this is really, really important, and I know you guys take this super seriously. And we have had a great partnership for, oh my gosh, over 15 years with Lou Talarita from the Department of Education on our steering committee to make sure that we're doing things right. And we ask him every year to do an annual training because we really want to make sure that folks who that kids are getting an education. We know that homelessness causes huge, major educational roadblocks and gaps in kids' lives. And so we want to make sure that they're getting a quality education and that we're teaming up with all the right people to make sure this happens. So we're talking about kids under the age of 18, and we're going to talk about, and it's about young adults also. And providers are required to make sure that families know about their rights. You'll hear us saying McKinney-Vento Education Services. Now they're calling it Every Student Succeeds Act. But we want to make sure that people have all the information they need, that we're supporting the efforts. Well, we'll do the next slide. The educational rights on the next slide remind us that grantees and subrecipients really have to ensure that kids are enrolled in school immediately. We want to make sure that they can attend their school of origin and that they have transportation to do that until the end of the academic year once they're housed. We want to make sure that there's a staff person who is designated to making sure that these rights, that folks have the rights and that are connecting people to educational services. And if you're thinking, I don't think we have someone, please make sure and go back to your staff and your folks to make sure that there really is someone doing this important work. I think Connecticut does a great job with this. When we write the CoC application, I'd often reach out to folks serving young adults and families and hear about how involved providers are in going to Board of Ed meetings and how closely connected they are to folks at school. So great job, but we just want to make sure that everybody knows about it. And again, if you don't have a staff person or you don't know who that staff person is, please go back to your agencies and find that out. And you are required to have a policy on this. We have a great sample policy where you're going to do something similar. Okay. So there are also a slew of rights notices that are just really important to make sure they're happening. So there is a participant bill of rights. There's the Violence Against Women Act, emergency transfer. There's grievance policies. You want to make sure that folks know about these. And what you can do is you can have an acknowledgement of receipt. So it says that you've provided all of these and sign-offs have happened so that tenants really know what's happening here. We're not going to go through all of these, but they're also required forms for DOH. you can click on all these links. They're required forms from Demas. And so you can check these out. And also just a plug for the Boss website and checking things out. All of these things live on our website. And we covered this in detail at the housing requirements training on March 18th. And so you can check out the recording and check out the slides if you need more detail on any of this. So this is my favorite because it sounds like we're Dr. Seuss again, with the Baba. So in 2021, the bill passed the Buy America, Build America, Buy America. And what it says is, and I think it was Sarah on our team who did some guidance on this, also on our website, also the link there to let you know more than you ever want to know about it. So let's do the next slide and tell you what it is. So what is BABA? BABA says that we need to use domestically sourced materials and products in our CoC projects. I'm gonna spoil the next slide in a couple slides. This doesn't apply to most of you. This, if you have an operating budget, it applies to you, but it doesn't apply to lots of what you're doing. But we still want to make sure it's on your radar. Because it requires that steel and iron and manufactured products and construction materials used in what's infrastructure be produced in the United States. And the requirement is called the Buy America preference. So again, as I mentioned, it only applies to certain CoC activities. And if you want to read a lot about it, you can see the notice here for more details. Let's keep going. So what is subject to this? Construction, rehab, maintenance, repair. It applies to construction materials and manufactured products for grants that started on or after 8/23/24. And I'm going to keep saying it just so my friends like Sylvia don't start sending me texts about this. It only applies to CT Boss projects that have an operating budget line. So it does not apply. We can wait to do the next slide. It does not apply to supportive services, rental administration, rental assistance, or administrative activities. So Lauren put a grade, you're probably off the hook, but we just want to, it needs to be on your radar because if you're not off the hook, you need to be doing a few things. I'll go really quickly. So if this applies to you, what do we need to do? You need to make sure that these requirements are passed along to your subrecipients, contractors, vendors. You're going to add some language into your contracts. I'm not going to read that, but we gave you some language there. Let's do the next slide. So you want to just make sure that your procurement policies and procedures are updated and include these requirements. Again, if you have an operating line budget, you're going to want to take a look at the quick guide to make sure if it applies to your project, classification of materials, maybe there's a waiver that applies. And again, you just want to be in touch with anyone you're working with that this applies to. And then you also want to keep good records on it to make sure that you have done that and you're doing the right thing. All right.
Just real quick at the
Yes.
bottom here. So we know that many of your agencies are also getting ESG funds, and if
Yes.
you're doing renovations, et cetera, in your shelters, right, this is also gonna apply. So we've also included information about applicability of this in ESG here at the bottom.
Oh, great. Thank you, Lauren. So we're going to talk about additional required policies, and we'll start off with confidentiality, which does apply to everyone here. And so we know that the folks that we work with have already suffered a lot of indignities. And so we want to make sure that we're not piling on, and we want to make sure that we are doing right by folks in terms of sharing personal information and not sharing personal information at all. So we take this really seriously. I do, as you guys know, monitoring and go out to your program and review. And I think people are really good at this and have gotten very sophisticated about it. But it's just really important that it's not like just a bureaucratic thing. It's our way of respecting the people that we're working with. So We need to make sure that you have policies and procedures to make sure that participant records containing identifying information are secure and that information is handled in a manner that protects a participant confidentiality. What we aren't going to go into here are HIPAA requirements. So it's up to each agency to figure out what you need to do about HIPAA. We do expect that if you need to be HIPAA compliant, you are and you're following HIPAA requirements. But in terms of what we look at and when we go to monitor, these are what we're looking at, these particular aspects. Also, please remember if you're sending us an email about a tenant to our client, please don't use their name. When you upload documents into, sometimes you guys have to do Zengen or Dropbox, please redact and don't use people's names sometimes. And we're all moving too fast sometimes, but this is a really important matter. So please make sure that we are protecting confidentiality. Okay.
Just a couple things in the chat. So Katie
Oh,
earlier, sorry, I missed this, put in a link to the McKinney-Vento educational resources to the liaisons in each of the local communities. So if you don't already know who your
great.
McKinney-Vento liaison is, please check out that resource. Thank you, Katie. And then Margaret says, if not using HUD funds, then doesn't apply? Question mark. I sorry, Margaret, I'm not sure which topic we were on when you put that question in the chat. Do you want to clarify what apply, what?
The BABA.
Uh, I'm sorry, I can't speak to other federal funding sources and the extent to which BABA does or doesn't apply. If you're using CoC construction, which we don't have any, rehabilitation or operating, then it does apply, but I'm not able to
Yeah, I get
comment
that.
on other
Right.
federal funding sources.
Well, I guess right. I'm saying other funds to use the HUD at the HUD funded program, but you're not using the HUD funds for that
Again,
program.
I just don't know the answer
Yeah.
to that. I'm
Okay.
not able to
Thanks. Yeah.
comment on the applicability for the other sources. Sorry. Sarah, I know you did some work on this, if you can
So,
answer
so
that. Yeah,
Lauren, it's Mary Ellen. So I'm
yeah.
interpreting that construction as if I have a rental assistance grant tied to the new building, then BABA would be in play.
If you are doing new construction or rehabilitation, my guess is that BABA is going to be in play because you've got some federal funds that are funding that, and BABA is
Yeah,
probably in play. I'm not
yeah,
able to talk to the specifics of those other federal funding sources, but I would suspect you're right, Mary Ellen, it would apply.
yeah, because I have two HUD grants that will help operate the building once it's built.
It does, having the CoC rental assistance grant does not trigger the BABA requirements. What triggers the BABA requirements is potentially whatever other sources
Yeah,
you're
got
using.
it. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
But if it's not federal funds, then no.
Again, I'm sorry, but it's a big, complicated piece of federal
Yeah.
legislation.
Okay.
We're only prepared to talk about how it applies to the CoC
Okay.
program. I apologize.
Yep. Thank you.
That's okay. I got it.
Okay, and some of the links may have some answers in there too. So great. Okay,
Sorry, Liz, were you ready to?
I am, yes. Let's move on. Drug-free workplace, yes, here. So I won't read this whole slide, but I will make sure you guys just want to make sure your agency has a drug-free workplace policy. You want to make sure the policy includes all of these aspects on the slide, and you want to make sure that there is signage posted saying that you, in fact, are a drug-free workplace. Okay, I think that's fine. Next slide. More with drug-free workplace. You just want to make sure that you know that you have to tell HUD and any other federal funders within 10 days if you've received a notice of an employee's drug abuse conviction. And you're going to establish an ongoing drug-free awareness program to make sure that employees know about all the dangers of drug abuse in the workplace and that you want to keep it a drug-free workplace. You always want to make sure people know that there's available counseling or through an employee assistance program and what penalties may be imposed for drug abuse if that happens. Okay. So code of conduct. So everyone's required, all recipients and subrecipients have to have a written code of conduct. It has to meet minimum HUD requirements, and you need to make sure that it's on file with HUD. You guys might remember, I'm a terrible historian, but sometime in the last few years, HUD wiped out a bunch of people's code of conduct, so you're not going crazy. You did give it to HUD, and then HUD took it away. So just go ahead, do a little homework here, click on the Code of Conduct e-library so that you can see if you in fact have a code of conduct on file, because it's really important. This is one of those things, and again, a few years ago, HUD was not processing grants if they did not have a code of conduct on file. So we never want that to happen. So do a little homework, please, and make sure you've got that on file. And if you want to read even more about code of conduct, we have a link there for your information. Okay. So conflicts of interest. So what is a conflict of interest? It's when you're in a situation where you have competing obligations, duties, goals. And the example here is that staff of an agency that owns the property can't conduct rent reasonableness or provide the housing quality inspections for that property. So that makes sense because that's a pretty obvious conflict. We also want to make sure, just like we're doing this, everybody has a conflict of interest policy. And in the policy, it's not just employees, but it's employees, agents, consultants, officers, and elected appointed officials. And we want to make sure that there are no financial interests or folks benefiting from any activity. And this needs to go on for 1 year after someone's tenure in housing. So Lauren mentioned that when she is monitoring, often folks will have a conflict of interest policy, but they exclude that they're not, that it extends 1 year past the tenure of the person's employment. So the example might be what you can't do is be a housing specialist and use that position to set yourself up for a property management business venture and use all the landlords you've been working with to kind of keep that business going. You need to wait for 1 full year after you leave your job. I'll pause quickly for a second. Anything on conflicts of interest, questions, comments? No? Perfect. So some more written standards. All recipients and subrecipients have to follow the written standards developed by the CoC. Got a link there. They have to adopt the written standards. And then PSH projects, Lauren talked about the operations guide earlier. PSH projects are covered by the statewide PSH operations guide. Rapid rehousing projects are covered by the CTDOH rapid rehousing operations guide. And like Lauren said, if this is the first time you're hearing from them, maybe you're new or maybe you haven't had a chance to look at them, please take the opportunity to look at them. They have really, really good information in them. So they should be at your disposal. Yep.
If you are not either a PSH project or a rapid rehousing project, then you should have some kind of written policy that basically says that you adhere to the CoC written standards. It can literally be that one sentence, but you should have that in writing, and it's something that HUD could ask for if they come and monitor.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So what else do we need? We need to have rent reasonableness policies and procedures. So providers have to have policies for documenting rents, comparable rents, determining rent reasonableness, documenting rent reasonableness in case files. And just like we talked about before, PSH projects are covered by the operations guide. Rapid rehousing projects are covered by the rapid rehousing operations guide. And if you are using CoC rental assistance or leasing funds, that you are covered under the operating guides. And then we have links to rent reasonableness certification and CoC rent reasonableness and fair market rent. Okay. We want to make sure that we have written intake procedures. And again, PSH and rapid rehousing projects are covered by their relevant operation guide. But if you are a project that is not rapid rehousing or PSH, you want to make sure that you have intake procedures, that standards that let us know the order of priority for obtaining homeless documentation. So we're not going to go through what, this is not an eligibility training. We do have one of those if you need it. But looking at third-party documentation, remember examples of those are a letter from a shelter, the outreach team, a service provider, an HMIS record, an intake worker observation. And this would have to include justification based on their professional judgment. And then self-certification, which is the last one, as we know. And I won't go into it, but as you know, there are lots of limitations that apply to that. So make sure you check that out. Questions, comments? I did something come through the chat.
Yeah, there's a question, a very good question. Thank you, Sarah Pavone, always thinking about the extent to which the street outreach standards, the statewide street outreach standards, cover street outreach projects for some of this. So rent reasonableness is not going to apply to street outreach standards. And honestly, the answer is I'm not sure, Sarah. So I will make a note to myself to go in and look at those. And if they are not sufficient to cover our street outreach projects for this purpose, we will make sure that that happens in the next revision so that we can relieve our street outreach projects of that burden. Great thinking, Sarah.
So you guys might remember COVID, which made it really clear how important it is to have really, really good emergency preparedness and response policies and procedures. Connecticut did so great. The providers you guys were amazing. But we know how important it is, and I'm knocking on wood that there isn't something else coming, but we always have to be ready. So agencies have to have an emergency disaster preparedness and response plan. It needs to include a risk assessment so that we know the potential crises to focus on, a plan to coordinate with partners, making sure we know who those partners are and what we're going to do with them, emergency protocols to lessen the impact and loss and ensure that critical services can continue or resume as fast as we can get them back, and a plan to communicate with our staff, our clients, volunteers, if there is a public emergency. Okay. So we also want the plan to include a timeline for post-crisis evaluation and plan revisions. We want to have protocols for staff so that staff know how to execute the plan and that they're following the plan. And it is just really important that after something has happened, that you do a post-mortem, you do a debrief and say what worked, what didn't work, because generally in life, there's room for improvement. So just like people do for critical incidents, it's great for if there is an emergency, you sit down as a team, see what worked, what didn't work, and go from there. Okay. So we also want to make sure there are infection control protocols and that these align with what public health authorities are recommending. So we want to have things on maintaining program operations. We want to have things on symptom screening and testing. We want to make sure that we're building vaccine confidence and supporting folks' access to getting those vaccines, looking at risk reduction, universal precautions, disinfecting, hygiene, and staff training. And again, everybody did such an amazing job, really a lot of times on the fly with COVID, that it's so impressive. Again, just reiterating how important it is that we have these protocols in place. And we are going to do a poll. And Lauren, did you launch that?
Working on it, sorry.
Okay, no, it's okay. It just won't let me. I forgot.
On my right knee, over my pelvic area, I had
Maybe
I had one like that,
Uh,
and
sorry, I gotta find
then
it.
I went to see a
I'll
baby,
put
but
the address. There we go. It won't let me launch it. Result is being shared in this meeting, it says.
It's not letting me launch it either.
All right, let's just do it.
Let's
Let's do it out loud.
Let's just talk about it. So,
I'll see if I can get it resolved while you're talking it through.
all right, that's fine. So Maybe people can just yell at the answers here. Okay, I'm going to list some things and you're going to tell me if it's a conflict of interest. An employee conducts an HQS inspection on a unit owned by their agency. Is that a conflict of interest? Anyone? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, there we go. Okay, a
I
project.
got it launched.
Oh, you got it. Lauren got it up.
Can you
Sorry.
see it? Can everybody see it?
Yeah, I can. Can everyone see the poll?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, go ahead and do the poll if you would, please. And we've got two questions, or two, yeah. All right, maybe 20 more seconds, 20 more seconds. We're going to give you 10 seconds. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results. Okay, so we already did the first one. What's considered a conflict of interest? An employee conducts an HQS inspection on a home unit owned by their agency. Yep, you can't do that. A project rents units from an employee's son. Nope, can't do that. I think an agency uses employees' catering business to provide meals at a program site. Can't do that. So we did all of the above. Is any of this, any questions? Does that make sense to folks? Yeah, okay. Then the next one, which of these is a violation of client confidentiality? So are you allowed to share an interesting story about a client with a coworker? No, we can't do that, right? It's not appropriate. It's violates confidentiality. Can we share information with a colleague about a client to coordinate services for that person? What do we think? So a lot of folks check, yes, that this is a conflict, but in fact, as long as you're coordinating care as part of your team and staff, you are in fact allowed to do that. Having a list of clients posted on a bulletin board by your desk, that is also a violation. And leaving a client file open on your desk, again, also a violation. Questions, comments? Okay, we'll move on. We are down to our last administrative requirements. So these are record-keeping requirements that are examples of what HUD might look for if they come to monitor your project. Again, we have details in other trainings on this. We just wanted to make sure this was on your radar. So for supportive services, you're going to want to make sure that you have types of services provided, you have case notes, we have time records, you're doing assessments of service needs, and that's being documented. In terms of housing quality and lead-based paint, we want to make sure that the leased units with rental assistance are inspected annually for HQS, and you have all that documentation and paperwork, and you're doing visual assessments for lead-based paint in the units. And for rent reasonableness, you are finding 3 comparable units. Remember that rental assistance can't go over the reasonable rent, and for leasing, cannot exceed either the reasonable rent or the fair market rent. So again, that you are doing all these activities and then you are documenting them all so that if HUD comes to visit, you have everything in place and that you're providing these really important services. Okay. So record retention, what do you need to do here? So we know that you need a minimum of 5 years for records pertaining to CoC funds. We also know that for participant eligibility documentation, it must be maintained for 5 years after the end date of the last grant period that the participant was served. But shorthand, if you keep stuff for 7 years after discharge, you should be okay. And a good practice for actually this and for lots of other policies and checks to see what's happening in your agency is to do a chart audit of older charts to make sure that you have disability for PSH and homeless documentation. Did I see a question or a comment, Lauren? Nope.
That was just me telling people the link to the housing requirements
Okay.
training where
Oh, perfect. Yep.
all the stuff you just covered is gone over in detail.
That's great. All right. We are in the home stretch. So we also want to make sure that all recipients and subrecipients have an org chart and job descriptions. So you want to make sure that you can actually see the lines of authority and responsibility, and you want to have written job descriptions that explain the duties for staff. It's a requirement, so it's a bureaucratic requirement, but it's also just important to have. People really need to know what their jobs are, and it is helpful to have a good job description. So, okay. So subrecipient monitoring. So this is a requirement by HUD. All recipients have to maintain documentation and show that they are evaluating their subrecipients' risk of noncompliance. You need to do this at least annually. You have to retain the documentation. You have to provide a monitoring report to the CoC. And you have to show what the monitoring deficiencies, if any, are and what the resolution is. And what's very important, though, is that HI monitors projects on behalf of DEMIS and DOH. And HI will request monitoring reports for subs when we monitor the other projects with subs. And you may want to check out the recipient versus subcontractor guidance. I'm not going to go through it, but nonprofits may want to look at having folks be subcontractors instead of recipients because it's a lot less burdensome in terms of documentation, paperwork, and activities that needs to happen. And we're happy to help you, give us a call if you're thinking about what you should have, whether it be a subcontractor or a subrecipient. Okay. Okay, so we also need to have sub-recipient agreements and payments. You have to have a signed agreement with your sub-recipient. I'm not going to go through each of these, but you can look through them and see what you're required to have. And you want to make sure that payments to sub-recipients are required within 40 days of receipt of an approvable fund request from that subrecipient. So you want to make sure people are getting paid in a timely manner. And again, I'm going to keep moving, but you can look through these bullets and make sure that you are following the requirements. Okay. And I keep alluding to, and so does Lauren, the additional trainings, and I think she's put some in the chat. We have a lot there. So take a look at it. If you're overwhelmed and don't know where to find something, please call us or email us. We really take the part of our jobs of providing resources to you really, really seriously because what you do is so hard that we don't want to make your lives harder by not having a resource or being frustrated at our website. So please, please, please reach out. We'd love to have done, Lauren works so hard. Lauren's lead on all this. We work on it all together, but like a lot of time and energy has gone into pulling stuff together, and we'd be heartbroken if people can't find it and just throw their hands up. So don't throw your hands up, call one of us, and we would love to provide any resource, any training that we can to you. And I think we are down to questions, suggestions. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm looking outside and the sun is shining, so people could have been taking a walk or playing with their dog outside, but instead you're spending these 2 hours with us. So we're really very, very grateful.
Do you want to stop the recording now, Liz?
Every single penny that they spend